and throws all this, the culture, the language, the physical body, the processes, the technology, into pre-capitalist formation which can simply absorb it, which can simply control it, which can simply internalize it. What it does is that pre-capitalist formation gets reinforced. If pre-capitalist formations culturally, politically gets reformed and re-established, that is the meaning of the semi-feudal, semi-colonial character, which is actually the class character of the state. It is aligned, it is incapable. That capital politically doesn't need to, doesn't want to, culturally doesn't need to, doesn't want to, and will be subservient. It is incapable of transforming the totality of social relations reflected in the totality of capital-labor relations. I don't know, therefore, how capitalism comes. Capital-labor exists. Every bit of capital which comes brings with it high level of monetization. It brings in a labor market, no doubt, as required by that level of capital. It brings in sophisticated processes, systems, body of knowledges. It brings in scientific loads of knowledge which is thrown in. It brings all these reflections of capital-labor relationship. As much as all this grew in its own country when capital was growing progressively, these were derivatives of capitalism. It replicated itself. So the moot point is, if this particular capital is unable to do, does not want to do in the host nation, cannot reintegrate the people, then it cannot grow as it did in its own country as capitalism, changing the polity and the culture in totality and making it a free market economy. It cannot. So the simultaneity of the two is what we understand as semi-feudal, semi-colonial, which brings us to another dimension of, therefore, change. If development is the transformation of the property relations hindering the growth of productive forces, transformation of the property relations hindering the growth of productive force, then everything which is happening as we see, imperialism's expression, that is not happening. It is giving you reflections of monetization, free wage labor, market expansion, goods expanded. It is giving you all that, but it is not transforming the essential social relations of the society. In fact, it is reinforcing it. The point of the matter is that from whose eyes are we looking at? Imperialism is an extremely defined, clear, sharply present force in its manifestation of what it presents. It will present to you the best of cars, the best of factories, the best of malls, the best of roads, the best of clothes, the best of apparent technologies. It will present to you and it will mesmerize you. It will mesmerize the researcher and some of our political activists also, who will see that this is capital. Of course it is capital. Is this capitalism? Question. What we need to do is to be able to counterbalance this perception of imperialist form of capital's growth, simultaneously capture the process where there is a reformation, a modification of extra economic forms of oppression, which we are almost, it seems, at times, not all the time, at times, incapable of doing. We are not sensitive, aware of, or possibly even have the methodology, the scientific method to identify how extra economic forms of oppression are growing, modified forms of pre-capitalist oppression are growing, which is denying the conversion of this entire totality of relations in order to release the productive forces. R.S. Rao says something interesting at the end of that particular note. He says, following a general Leninist model, the existence of agricultural labor and persistence of capitalist accumulation are sufficient enough to characterize agriculture as moving onto capitalist mode. Following a general Leninist model, the existence of agricultural labor and persistence of capitalist accumulation are sufficient enough to characterize agriculture as moving on to capitalist mode. But following a Maoist perspective of new democratic revolution, the characteristics require identification of land hunger as a basic premise and a motive force for a change in agrarian structure. The motive force for change in agrarian structure does not rest with the rich peasantry, but with agricultural labor. This distinction in understanding semi-feudal, semi-colonial from the perspective of the agricultural labor, who can possibly brilliantly furnish you a number of examples of how extra-economic forms of expression he faces, and having been displaced from his knowledge base, from his life base, from his technology base, how destitute he feels residing with nothing to rely on except the extra economic forms of oppression which helps him survive. If seen from this person's eyes, we can see semi-feudal, semi-colonial from the side of imperialism, and we will see capitalism. You see semi-feudal, semi-colonial from the eyes of the agricultural labor, you will see a different story of how extra-economic forms of oppression are actually thwarting us. And that there is a higher expression to releasing of productive forces than through the monopoly, moribund, regressive capital of imperialism. R.S. Rao makes the point in 74 in another article, it is written here, I am not reading all of it. When you look at from the agricultural labor point of view, it will possibly be appropriate to create your own, to accumulate your own surplus generated in the way your society needs, in the way that section of people need, And they will define what they will need, how much they will need, at which stage they will need, how much advancement they want. Because culturally, they have to be the creator of the surplus and the release of productive forces, both physically and knowledgeably. Nobody, no amount of conservation, forestry techniques can be taught to the poorest tribe. You cannot teach, and even if you can, you must not teach. Let that person decide what is conservation, what is it, what level it wants to. If that is not allowed to be released, that is the productive force which one is talking. That is the anti-feudal component of the new democratic framework of change. Is what R.S. Rao has since 67-68 continues to do so. And the debate notwithstanding, he says, I hold on to this formulation because I am clear, apart from the materialist conception of history, this is how capital operates. There can be no two other ways to it on interpretation. Possibly, if we are residing within a semi-feudal, semi-colonial society, our biggest war as researchers, progressive intellectuals, revolutionary intellectuals, as revolutionary practitioners, is to be sensitive to how much we ourselves are steeped and part of this extra economic form of thinking, wherein we fail to realize ourselves the amount of reformation of this operation taking place. How much do we ourselves realize the practice of patriarchy which operates while being very progressive is a big question, to which R.S. says, look at it from the agricultural laborer's eyes. The micro foundations of Marxism is what he and Dr. Bharti have worked together, is something which we have to be able to understand and internalize, to be able to understand the logic, the dialectics of this formulation of semi-feudal, semi-colonial, and therefore a new democratic approach to change. That song of this village is mine, this gully is mine, everything I do is mine. If that is not kept at the center of it, you cannot even think of releasing the productive forces. The release is of the freedom of this man, not the appropriation of this high organic capital which gives us reflections of growth, not development, because it doesn't transform, changes. There is a very fascinating piece initiated by Professor R.S. Rao among some friends. It's the most fascinating piece of fiction residing on the most plausible practice of a movement in Dandakaranya. And he says that over 40 years, how is it that people who went to work there, political activists, from small day-to-day issues of health, well-being, food, preservation, emerged in 40 years to transform from a labor-scarce economy, tribal economy, possibly transform it, which is develop it, to a land-scarce economy, which is land-based system. This process of transformation, where the culture resides, the culture of technology, the culture of change resides with the people, that piece tells us that the transformation process is not one depending on capital which displaces. That is not capitalism, but it is this people's release of productive forces, the freedom to think, the freedom to act within their political power is what can transform society into a new democratic force leading onwards to other changes. This song always brought him culturally aligned to the formulation and the logic which he held on and has written so vastly about. The new democratic stage of change basically looks at releasing this productive force, basically looks at reintegrating these people in their eyes, in their ways, in their methods into a new social formation where people are at the center of the surplus generation and it is not just some amorphous system. The section of people who will actually want this change. Land-based structures, land-based relations which are extra-economic reflect the backwardness which we are facing, the semi-feudal, semi-colonial character. And this backwardness is what one is proposing to look at very clearly from the eyes of the agricultural laborer. The creation of surplus value has to be theirs, and it will have to start possibly at the level it is from absolute surplus value generation, which is labor owned differently now, because there is no national bourgeoisie which can take any leadership. It is a new democratic leadership which has to take over. There is a lot Professor Rao has written on this topic. Practice versus theory. Theory is highly dialectical, conceptualization is highly dialectical, formulation is highly dialectical, practice is pretty linear. Perhaps we may have to look at our process of extracting from our practice in a dialectical way to be able to understand how it is not just capital labor relation as we see or its derivatives as we see, but the factor of displacement and not being able to reintegrate the people, and that the agricultural labor defines the real anti-feudal component of the struggle, which means the release of productive forces required for a change. I think this in many ways is what he has spoken about, he's held on to, and he believes that a forum like Veerasam will take this and actively debate it and be able to defend it because of its basic Marxist method contained. And I would say that I have had the privilege to walk with him for 40 years. He gives the freedom to be part of the family, and with Dr. Bharati welcoming me. I thank her personally for being a friend, philosopher, guide, and almost equally a mother to me. Thank you, Veerasam, for giving me this opportunity.